cytology. I'm starting a couple minutes early. Is everybody here? Okay. So we'll take a break at about 10 till 2, if I'm still going by then. I think I will be. All right. So there are 3 major salivary glands, the parotid, the submandibular, and the sublingual. And then there are a variety of minor salivary glands, little islands of salivary gland tissue throughout the oral cavity. Quite a few up in the soft palate behind the hard palate, and a couple that are actually adjacent to the hard palate. So this is kind of the diagram of the anatomy. Here's your parotid gland. It's connected by a big duct, which is called a parotid duct, or Warthin's duct is another name for it. Then you've got a submandibular gland right here, and your sublingual right there. And then there are just a whole bunch of other minor glands. So you can also have salivary gland tissue in places where it isn't found normally in people. We call that heterotopic salivary gland. You can have it as far south as in your thyroid, sometimes south of your thyroid even. It can be adjacent to the brain. Sometimes you'll see they'll have a little island of salivary tissue in the dura mater or something. They can, of course, anywhere you have heterotopic salivary gland tissue, you can have a tumor form in it. So that's just kind of a thing that pathologists have to be aware of. So you get these. The basic salivary glands are what you call exocrine glands, and that just means that they don't secrete things directly into the bloodstream, rather into their own ductal system. And of course we know that all ends up in the oral cavity. So these tubuloacinar groups of cells, which can either be secreting proteins called zymogen granules or zymogen cells, or mucus producing cells, and these little acinar units here join up to form ducts, and the ducts have more of a columnar-shaped epithelium. So the kinds that produce more protein are called the serous types of acini, and then the ones that produce more mucinous stuff are called mucinous. And you can think of it as like when you're just about to eat dinner and you're salivating, that's mostly serous. Mucinous is what you secrete overnight, and while you wake up and you're all, so you need the mouthwash and stuff. That's the mucinous type. And then there are mixed acini, but they're not very common. So the serous cells are pyramidal and very basophilic, and they have these granules and a very granular cytoplasm, and those granules are called zymogen granules, and they have all the proteins that you need, like amylase and stuff that you find in saliva. And those are the same as secretory granules, and they're very similar in appearance to the acinar cells of the pancreas. In fact, if you have a section of the parotid gland in the right area, it can be very difficult to tell that from the pancreas, except for the islets are missing. That's how you tell. That was probably serous because they were secreting in response to a meal, and that's usually the really watery saliva is all the serous, because it's very high in amylase, which helps you to digest starch. And a little experiment you can try, I don't know if you guys ever tried this in junior high school or whatever, where you chew on a cracker forever, and the starch in the cracker will eventually turn sweet because of the amylase in your saliva. But you have to chew it for like 20 minutes before you get there. Takes a while to complete the experiment, but if you can do it without swallowing, you'll find that the cracker turns sweet after some time. Okay, and these are the serous acini. Again, very granular cytoplasm, and that's due to those zymogen granules. The mucus cells, the cytoplasm appears empty or vacuolated, like an intestinal goblet cell, very similar. They're very intensely positive with PAS because of the mucin, and you can also stain it with mucicarmine. That would work too. The nuclei are generally flat and against the base of the cells because of those mucus globules. Sorry. And these are those mucinous acini, and you can see they're just full of mucin. The nuclei are up against the base of the cell, and what you're going to see in cytology is just a very big vacuole that takes up most of the cell. So there are other cell types you can see occasionally. There are cells called oncocytes, very similar to Hurdle cells in the thyroid gland. And for the same reason, they're full of mitochondria. It's usually a metaplasia of either the duct lining cells or the acinar cells themselves. There are myoepithelial cells. Those are the cells that are lining the acini and the ducts. Just like in the breast, they have myoeps. Well, you have them here too. So you've got those between your secretory cells and the basement membrane. They have a contractile function to contract the acini to get that material, the saliva, moving into the ductal system and out into the oral cavity. Okay, here's your mixed acini, so there's your serous ones, here's your more mucinous cells, and occasionally you'll see both in the same acinus, although it's not real common. The one place this is the most common of all is the submandibular gland. There's usually going to be about half the serous acini and half the mucinous, so you might see a few mixed ones in between. And if they're all or almost all serous in the parotid gland and all or almost all mucinous in all the minor salivary glands and the sublingual gland. And there's a nice big duct. And you can see how, it starts to look oncocytic here. Well, if it just gets a little bigger, a little pinker cytoplasm, then you call it an oncocyte. And, well, that's what I was just saying. Parotid is almost all serous cells. Submaxillary is mixed, and sublingual is mostly mucinous. And the minor are almost all mucinous. So as the secretions go from those acinar cells, they get into the small ducts, which are called intercalated ducts, which intercalated just means kind of scattered in between. That's all that means. So the intercalated ducts get bigger, and they have their secretory striated ducts complete with some connective tissue around them to hold them in place. And they have very tall columnar cells, as you can expect. The largest ducts go into the excretory or interlobular ducts, and they are the ones that go into the oral cavity. And you're going to have a columnar, perhaps a little bit of pseudostratification to the nuclei, but generally just a simple columnar lining. So what kind of benign things can you see? Well, a mucocele or a mucus retention cyst is a quite common thing. It's just like a big glob of mucin that's gotten caught and can't get out. And, like anywhere mucin gets stuck, in the cervix we call them Nabothian cysts. In the mouth they're called mucoceles. It's a pretty similar thing. Sialadenitis is an inflammatory reaction you see. Occasionally you can get it because of bacteria that back up into the duct. You can also get a chronic sialadenitis from an obstruction because of sialolith, which is just when the saliva forms, crystallizes and gets stuck, and the duct can't get it past it. And that, of course, is painful, and usually, that's why they come to medical attention. And then there's also granulomatous sialadenitis. Usually it's either because someone's been palpating their duct a lot, that can cause it. Sometimes tuberculosis, but that's rare here, and other granulomatous diseases. So chronic sialadenitis, this is what it looks like. No surprise there, a lot of chronic inflammation. There's something called Sjogren syndrome too that can cause a similar picture, but it'll have a lot of plasma cells. It's how you tell it apart. And it tends to present with dry mouth. So this is another chronic, just the usual chronic inflammation, lymphocytes and monocytes. It's what you expect, or lymphocytes and macrophages in the tissue. So what kind of lymphocytic lesions? You've got benign lymphoepithelial lesions, which are where the lymphocytes are actually starting to attack the ducts, and you can actually see that the ducts are getting damaged. Sjogren syndrome, again, is like that, but with plasma cells, and usually there's an autoimmune component to it, so they'll have other autoimmune diseases often. They tend to hit the parotid and submandibular glands, and you see this destruction of the acini or ducts, small ducts, the intercalated ducts, by a dense lymphocytic infiltrate. And this is supposed to be your lymphoepithelial cyst lesion. You can see it's attacking ducts there, and there's also, growing in here. This is the oral cavity, probably right here. But usually if you get close to it, you can see that it's attacking ducts. Sjogren syndrome tends to look like this, but it usually also has a prominent plasma cell component. It's kind of hard to tell that from here, but if you go up on high power, you probably see a lot of plasma cells in there. This is Sjogren syndrome too, and it tends to fibrose down these ducts after a long period of time. So they'll get this fibrosis, and there probably are a few plasma cells in there. My guess would be that those are plasma cells. It's kind of hard to tell from here, but it's probably what's going on. Okay, so you can get a lot of tumors in the salivary glands, and both benign and malignant. And although the histology of salivary glands is easy, the pathology is hard, and there's really no way around that. It's kind of interesting, though, and as in my experience as a cytopathologist, I actually prefer to see these things in cytopath than in histo. I think it's much easier to make the diagnoses in cyto. Yeah. Sjogren? Yeah. Right. Well, occasionally there are antibodies that can cross the placental barrier. Most of these autoimmune things don't, but we have specific names for all of them. It's not as much like the blood bank ones that you got to worry about hemolytic disease in the newborn, because these tend to attack adult tissues. Like the Sjogren syndrome antibodies, actually appropriately named SSA and SSB, that's pretty easy. They tend to attack only mature salivary glands, and they don't tend to cross the placenta, so it doesn't really bother the kids. Usually it's dry mouth. That's the major symptom. So, they'll just tell you that, they're constantly having to put peppermints in their mouth or something to keep it wet because they just can't keep it. They have cotton mouth all the time, and it's usually pretty bad. And because they have cotton mouth, they have trouble swallowing and other manifestations. Often, Sjogren's will come as a secondary thing. The person will already have lupus or some other common autoimmune disease, rheumatoid arthritis, say, and then they end up getting these symptoms, and they end up getting Sjogren's on top of it. That's a very helpful part of making the diagnosis, because there's a wide differential for dry mouth, so they can be very helpful. And then you do the blood test for the antibodies. So all these neoplasms, there's a WHO classification, World Health Organization classification of all these things. One of them, the most common benign thing is a pleomorphic adenoma. And then there are these other things that we call monomorphic adenomas. Pleomorphic is mixed tumor, obviously, So when we say pleomorphic, we're not talking. It's kind of a weird word, because usually when you guys hear pleomorphic, you're thinking of bad nuclei, or something like that, a big change in the nuclear sizes or variations in sizes. The reason they call this pleomorphic adenoma is because it has a variety of forms. It can look like a bunch of different things. But it's always a mixture of the myoepithelial and epithelial component, usually with some cartilage and other things in the background, a lot of fat and other kind of things. That's why they call it pleomorphic. There's a lot of variance between cases of what these look like. So it's an unfortunate terminology. And the other side of that is when you only have one piece of that puzzle, they call it a monomorphic adenoma, depending on what that piece is. If it's ductal cells with a lot of lymphocytes, it's going to be a Warthin's tumor. If it's just the ductal cells with the oncocytic change, they call it Oncocytoma. And then you have these epithelial, myoepithelial types, it's going to be one or the other, not both generally. You have basal cell adenomas, which are common, but they can be difficult because they look a lot like a malignant thing that we'll talk about later. Canalicular adenomas, where they're making little canals in the tumor. Myoepithelioma, where only the myoepithelial part is involved, and it's still monomorphic. That's just the other part. And then clear cell adenomas, where they're all clear. Ductal papillomas are kind of a common thing, and that looks like a papilloma in the breast or anywhere else. And then you can have other vascular and miscellaneous tumors that are benign as well. So pleomorphic adenoma is more common in females. You see it in pretty much all ages, but between the 20s and 50s are where most of them happen. Parotid is the most common place. Submandibular, it happens sometimes, and very occasionally in minor salivary gland, but it's pretty rare in sublingual. And it's fairly rare in the minor salivary glands as well. The vast majority happen in parotid. They're painless. And they usually spare the facial nerve, which is good because if a tumor goes into the facial nerve, you tend to get facial paralysis, and that's usually an indication something malignant is going on. So if they have their facial droop and they start to get facial nerve paralysis, the clinicians go, oh gosh, this is probably something bad. That's why they say this benign thing spares it, because that's important. Nobody's really quite sure what the cell line is. It's just some sort of cell that appears to be able to differentiate both into a myoepithelial and a acinar type cell. And it is the most common of all salivary gland neoplasms. Here's what they look like. They look surprisingly, what's the word I'm looking for? Surprisingly bland, because there's a lot of different things in them, but you don't really get that impression on gross. Now, occasionally you will see cartilage in them, and that's very helpful, because virtually any tumor in the salivary gland with cartilage in it's going to be a mixed tumor. So, what are you? Oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. Try that again. Okay. Maybe if there we go. So, like I was saying, pleomorphic adenoma is going to have a mixture of epithelial, myoepithelial, and stromal components as well. The stromal component is the part that usually becomes cartilage or fat or something. The epithelial can form a variety of patterns. The stroma is usually going to be somewhat myxoid, and that's very important because that's what we see on cyto on the diff-quick that just makes it this tumor. You know, if you see this image that I'll show you in the cyto, you will know that it's a pleomorphic adenoma, and that's that. You know, and it's really nice, easy diagnosis to make. Sometimes you'll see chondroid, and that's, you know, not expected with cartilage, and fibrostroma as well. Squamous cells can occur. There can be keratinization. There can be mucous cells, oncocytes, even sebaceous cells, even calcification. Sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes you'll even see benign bone formation in these things. So here's your pleomorphic adenoma. See, this is the part that looks like cartilage here, and that's very helpful to make that diagnosis. You'll see these islands of epithelial cells in there as well. The myxoid stroma, usually only rare cells in there, and then this fibrous stuff all around it. So that's your pleomorphic. And this is basically benign, or this is all just a normal salivary gland here. So it's usually pretty well circumscribed, but not. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, real nice myxoid stroma, these islands of epithelial cells. Usually you'll see spaces in there somewhere. It'll either be like a long canal of cells, which we call a trabecula, or like a ducts. So either of those. What's the differential? Well, if there's only one of the cell types, then it would be a monomorphic adenoma. There is this carcinoma of minor salivary glands. It's called a low-grade polymorphous carcinoma. A lot of the differential here is just knowing where you are. If you're in the parotid, it's not going to be a low-grade polymorphous, because low-grade polymorphous only happens in the minor salivary glands in general, and vice versa. So if you know where you are, you're going to favor one over the other. You know, obviously the experts can be helpful in that regard. Adenoid cystic carcinoma, it has a different kind of stroma, and we'll get into that a little bit, but it is a little differential. Adnexal neoplasms. But the diagnosis of a pleomorphic adenoma is usually pretty straightforward. So, and what do you got to do? You got to take it all out. Why? Because there's this thing called carcinoma ex pleomorphic adenoma. It's very rare, but occasionally these do turn malignant. So we always recommend taking them all out. But it has an excellent prognosis as long as that's not in there, and they don't recur. I mean, they will recur if you don't take them all out, but they don't recur if you don't. And that's the malignant transformation is the reason they have to come out. Okay. So the monomorphic adenomas is where you have one of these elements. Usually it's epithelial or myoepithelial, and they can be in a variety of arrangements. The most common things are the basal cell adenoma, oncocytoma, and Warthins. Warthins has a really long papillary cystadenoma lymphomatosum is the generic name for it. That's why we call it Warthin's tumor. Yeah, there we go. papillary cystadenoma lymphomatosum. So, and adenolymphoma is a terrible name because everybody thinks lymphoma when they see that and don't ever use that name. So, just letting you know. It's completely benign, and it has these papillary, we call it the red, white, and blue tumor because it has a white background with spaces. It has red, the oncocytes, which form the red cells, and then all the lymphocytes make it look blue, so it looks like a red, white, and blue. So, and the cystic changes are also part of the white part. So the clinical, it's 12% of benign salivary tumors. I would think it would be more actually, but 6% of the malignant ones. And male is greater than female. And wide age range, 6 or 7 disease. Nearly always in the parotid gland and presents it as a painless mass. It does have an association with smoking, so you can see these a little bit more often in smokers. In fact, it's the only benign tumor I know of that has a strong association with smoking. So they tend to be soft and fluctuant, and that's partly because they've got this motor oil-like material in the cystic spaces. So that's why it feels soft or more like a cyst than like a hard, solid mass. Often you'll get a lot of this fluid out when you're doing an FNA, and you just take off as much fluid as you can. Then you go back and do your real FNA on the mass because all that motor oil stuff is going to dilute out your cell population. So you just take that stuff, you make a little dime-sized smear of it, and then you put the rest in for cell block, and then you go on and do your real one once you've got all that motor oil stuff out of there. So, like I said, papillary, look to it, and then you've got those lymphoid areas. So it's composed of epithelial cells and the lymphoid cells. The papillations are a double layer of oncocytes. The inner layer is taller than the basal layer, no surprise there. The lymphoid infiltrate can have germinal centers in it. You can see goblet cells, mucus cells, and squamous metaplasia, although they aren't usually a predominant part of the tumor. That's just to let you know that just because you see a couple of squamous cells or goblet cells, it doesn't rule this out. That's what they're trying to tell you. Okay, here you go, red, white, and blue. And you see why we call it that? I mean, it has that boom. You know the diagnosis as soon as you put that slide on the scope. And it's really, really nice and easy pattern recognition. So you've got the white with the cystic spaces, the red, these nice tall, eosinophilic columnar cells, then a second layer of basal cells which are more cuboidal, then all your lymphoma, or lymphomatous infiltration, lymphoid infiltration, I should say, with the germinal center here, and that can be seen, and it's completely benign. Now, if you don't have the lymphocytes, then you call it an oncocytoma. Basically, it's the same thing without the lymphocytes. These are rare. Usually you will have the lymphocytes, but it's about the same kind of age range, older, men, equal women in this case. The oncocytes are because of all the mitochondria pack into these cells and gives it this characteristic eosinophilic appearance. So, you know, whether it's a neoplasm or some sort of just metaplastic phenomenon isn't completely known, but I think it's favored to be a neoplasm at this point. Just like a hurdle cell adenoma in the thyroid, it's pretty similar to that. Grossly, it's well circumscribed or encapsulated. It'll be orange to rust colored. That's because mitochondria have a lot of iron in them. So mitochondria are where you make your oxygen. Remember that all that oxidative phosphorylation. Each of those heme molecules inside the mitochondria have to have an iron in the middle of them to work. So that whole electron chain thing, that's all, you know, that all contributes to that rust color that you see. So that's what an oncocytoma looks like. And it basically looks the same. You just don't have the blue. You don't have the lymphocytes in there. So it's the red and white without the blue. Okay. Differential diagnosis, well, if you have lymphocytes, then it'd be a Warthin's tumor. If it has the myoepithelial component or stromal component, it would be a pleomorphic adenoma. Is it possible for you to have a carcinoma with oncocytes change in it? Yes, it is. So you got to look for that. And then it very rarely, but unfortunately it does happen, renal cell carcinomas can metastasize from the kidney to the salivary gland. And so you can get a granular cell, renal cell, metastasizing to the salivary gland and kind of fake you out on these. Often it's nice to have a history. If the person has a history of renal cell, it's real nice to know. But oncocytoma should be excised, but recurrences are rare, real good prognosis. You can't radiate it to death, that doesn't work. And there is such a thing as a malignant oncocytoma, just to know that. The other term is oncocytic carcinoma, sometimes you'll see that. Basal cell adenoma is one that's all basaloid cells. And you can have different kinds. You can have solid, trabecular, tubular, membranous types. Those are all basically different patterns of growth. And the AFIP has this dermal analog type, but it doesn't really matter. The hard part of this is that they're hard to tell apart from adenoid cystic carcinoma. That's what makes these important. So the growths, well, again, well circumscribed, usually encapsulated. They can have various colors of their cut surface, and they're lobulated. And this is what they can look like. So they're basaloid cells, similar to what you'd see in basal cell carcinoma of the skin, usually in different kinds of patterns. There can be types with a myoepithelial differentiation in them, but they should be all monomorphous within the same tumor. So if there's a myoepithelial component, they're all going to be that myoepithelial component. Light microscopy, sometimes you can see like a dark areas and light areas, what they're talking about, where the dark areas are on the outside of the lobules and the light areas in the middle. And this is what that's talking about. And you'll see on the basaloid cells, the outside of these, the nuclei will do what we call palisade. Like they'll make like a picket fence around the inside, and then the inside will be a little bit lighter, a little bit more space between the cells, usually. And one thing that's very helpful, this is a trabecular pattern, and occasionally, because I'm going to show you an adenoid cystic later, but occasionally, because these spaces get left behind, they'll be reminiscent of adenoid cystic, because adenoid cystic is very cribriform, looks like a sieve, like with a bunch of punched out holes in it. And this can look a lot like that, but one really very helpful thing is that these don't invade nerves. Adenoid cystic always invades nerves, and you just have to look for it. But sometimes it's hard to find, but if you look for it and you cannot find any perineural invasion, then it's probably just a basal cell adenoma. And I've seen a few people been saved by that fact, because it's a very benign thing versus a very malignant thing, so you really want to be able to make that distinction. This is the tubular pattern where they all look like little tubules of cells. And it can be a little bit harder because it doesn't have so much of the palisading and the light areas and dark areas as when it's tubular, but again, just has that same pattern. This is again where it can start to look a little bit like an adenoid cystic, but this is just intracellular hyaline membranes and not true cribriforming. So, okay, so differential diagnosis. Pleomorphic adenoma. Obviously, if there's, but you have two cell components. Adenoid cystic carcinoma, that's the one you really want to tell the difference. There is a basal cell adenocarcinoma. That's generally easier because the cells look malignant in that one, so it's actually easier to tell. Adenoid cystic, unfortunately, the cells don't look that malignant. It can be a really tough one, but it always invades nerves, and that's very helpful. Canalicular adenoma is really probably just a variant of basal cell adenoma with a very prominent canalicular growth pattern. So that one may not be that, they're both completely benign basal cell adenoma and canalicular adenoma, so it really doesn't matter if you make that distinction. So recurrence of these is rare, except for the membranous type. That tends to recur, but it isn't malignant, it just recurs a lot. Partial resection is often curative, so sometimes you don't even have to get all of it. But with the membranous, you really do want to try to get all of it. The problem is it tends to be multifocal. It tends to skip around in the gland, so it can be difficult to get around the entire thing. And that's why about a quarter of them do actually come back. So here's your canalicular adenoma. Branching interconnecting cords. That's what we mean by canaliculi, little cords with usually 2 different layers of cells. That way it looks like a little canal. And it'll be in a low stroma. It tends to occur in the upper lip. These tend to very strongly occur in the upper lip. So if you see something that looks like a basal cell adenoma in the upper lip, think about canalicular adenoma. And this is real nice because it shows you those little canals. It can have a little bit of a lymphocytic component, but it's not as much as you'd see in a Warthin's. So that usually helps with that differential. And you can just see these little canals, very loose little cords in a myxoid stroma. All right, so papillomas we talked about. There's intraductal papilloma, which is easy because it occurs in the duct and stays completely confined within that duct. Makes it pretty easy to make sure it's benign. The inverted is a little bit harder because it grows down and in from the duct surface. So it looks like it's invasive, but it's not really. So that's a little bit harder. But it still has that nice papillary pattern, and usually you can get to, And then there's adenoma papilliferum, which is a kind of a different animal, and I think we have pictures. So here we go. This is real nice endophytic, into the duct lumen pattern. Very easy to tell that it's not invasive or anything, very well circumscribed. Delicate papillary fronds growing into the lumen. And usually you can find fibrovascular core if you look around. Okay, so I guess we don't have that adenoma papilliferum, but don't worry about it. I mean, it's just another benign papillary thing. So, other benign tumors, you can get sebaceous gland tumors, or you can get sebaceous differentiation. Sometimes in your mixed tumors, that happens too. But there are also sebaceous adenomas, sebaceous lymphadenoma, which would be like a Warthin's, only all the cells are sebaceous instead of the pink ones. And then there's a thing called salloblastoma, which is potentially malignant, but so there you go. You've got a very diverse group of neoplasms. Histology can be quite varied, and it's more important to tell it from the malignant things that look like it than to tell from each other. But obviously it's helpful if you can tell them apart. So there are as many carcinomas as there are benign things. Like I said, salivary gland has just got a lot of stuff. The good news is that most of these are fairly rare. The ones with the asterisks are the ones that are actually the more common ones. So carcinoma pleomorphic adenoma is actually fairly rare, but it's important because it's why pleomorphic adenomas have to be taken out. These 3, acinic cell, Mucoepidermoid, and adenoid cystic, are the ones you really need to know about. And a mucoepidermoid, yeah, that's the other one. So mucoepidermoid carcinoma is 2 to 7% of all salivary gland neoplasms. Most of them occur in the parotid, but many of them do arise in the minor salivary glands, and it is the second most common malignancy of salivary glands, and the most common in children, because these do occur in children. There can be a mixture of squamoid and mucin-secreting cells. The mucin-secreting cells are positive for mucicarmin, so they can be found that way. And this tumor is graded. You can have a low grade, intermediate grade, or a high grade mucoepidermoid. So mucoepidermoid carcinoma tends to have a very mucousy look to it. There tend to be these 3 types of cells: the salivary gland cells, some intermediate cells, and the mucinous cells. But none of that other stromal stuff you see in pleomorphic adenomas. Here again, any of these cells with the spaces here, you're probably going to be able to hit it with a mucicarmin and get them to shine red. And then you've got these squamous cells in here, and then there are going to be some cells that are in between squamous and mucinous. And this would be a real nice low-grade one. Basically, you just grade them based on how much they look like the cells they started from. So if they're nice squamous cells, nice goblet cells, with cells in between those two, then that's a low grade. If they start to look bad, ugly, then they're high grade. So, it's really not that hard to do. And acinic cell carcinoma is uncommon, but not too uncommon. I've seen several cases. It runs about 1% of all salivary gland neoplasms. Again, the majority occur in the parotid. But the cells here resemble the serous acinar cells of the parotid, and it can be very tricky on cytology to tell these apart. Usually you just have more cells than you'd expect to see. That's a big hint. And they can arise from multipotential intercalated duct cells. So that's the cells, actually not the acini themselves, but the cells, the ducts right there next to the acini. They're composed of some cords or sheets or nests of these rounded cells with the basophilic granular cytoplasm, similar to the zynogen granules you see in the serous cells in the parotid. So, and here you go. It just looks a lot like those cells in the parotid. There are some spaces. It's a little bit redder looking. Yeah. And you can even have ducts in there. And it's often very helpful to have the surrounding normal because it'll look different from that. But it can be tricky. And cystic carcinoma is also most common in the parotid. You see a trend here, parotid's pretty much the most common for everything. However, 20% of submandibular tumors are adenoid cystic carcinoma. So, what that means is if you're in the minor salivary glands, this is the most common tumor. Just one of those things. Especially it tends to occur in the hard palate. And it's a very bad place to occur because you've got a lot of connective tissue up there, a very hard palate, which means you're not going to feel anything go through it until it's really advanced, and you've got brain north of there. So it's a lousy place to have a tumor get started. And often these people will have huge defects in their face after the surgery because they try to get as much of this stuff out as they can. But it tracks up the nerves, meaning it goes right up to the border with the brain. And I've seen, people actually take out a little bit of that, little bit of the meninges to try to get all of the tumor. And it's pretty impressive how badly these people are disfigured after the surgery. And they can reconfigure the face, but they just put flap or something. They take that flap off like this huge gaping hole. So I've seen a couple of guys like that. And then the worst thing is that this tumor is extremely malignant, but it's very what's the word? It's indolent. It takes a long time. So you can get this huge surgery, and then you'll be okay for about 10 years, maybe 15, and then it's going to come back. And they almost always do. And then they'll come back in the lymph nodes. They may attack the lung. So, it's just one of these things. It's just really bad to have because they just keep coming back. And again, like I said, the most common of the minor salivary glands, the most common pattern is cribriform. Although they can have tubular patterns or solid patterns, the cribriform is the most common one. And the cystic spaces in the cribriform, so cribriform meaning sieve-like in shape. The spaces of the sieve will be positive for PAS because it has this hyaline-based membrane-like material that stands for that. They're very infiltrative, and it's not really frequent. I would say perineural invasion is universal in these tumors. I have not seen one that doesn't have it. And it's a very helpful thing when you're trying to make the diagnosis. Okay, so here's what we're talking about cribriform. So it looks like a strainer or a sieve. And the spaces have all this mucoid or myxoid material that stands very nicely with PAS. And it also stays together in those ball-like configurations on cytology, even when the cells aren't around. So when you've got a pleomorphic adenoma where it looks all fibrillar, with the adenoid cystic, it's this more punched-out ball-like hyaline balls. So you'll see that in the cyto part of the lecture. So again, you can get these carcinomas ex pleomorphic adenoma where the pleomorphic adenoma becomes a poorly differentiated adenocarcinoma. And what do you look for there? You look for an adenocarcinoma. It looks like an adenocarcinoma anywhere else. Eccentric nuclei, prominent nucleoli, all that stuff. So if you see that in the background of pleomorphic adenoma, you say pleomorphic adenoma with atypical cell-C comment, can't rule out a carcinoma ex pleomorphic adenoma, please excise, and we'll let you know when we get the excision. Other malignant tumors. So you get your adenocarcinoma in OS. where it just looks like an adenocarcinoma anywhere else. Squamous cell carcinoma, same deal. Looks like squamous cell carcinoma anywhere else. Undifferentiated carcinoma, that just means it's ugly and I don't know what it is, except it's not a sarcoma. Small cell carcinomas can happen anywhere, including here, and malignant lymphomas as well. Okay, things can metastasized to the salivary glands too. We already talked about renal cell. Lymphoma often involves the salivary glands, and so you've got to be a little bit careful about, not overlooking the lymphoid component of your smears. If they all look like the same kind of cell, they may not be the same kind of cell, and that's a bad thing. So you've got to, beware of that. Most common metastatic tumors to salivary glands are squamous cell carcinoma and malignant melanoma. Squamous cell usually arises in the tonsils or somewhere near where the salivary glands are, so often it can be involved by direct extension and mimic a salivary gland mass, or it can metastasize there from the neck nodes or somewhere else, from the larynx commonly. And then melanoma can end up anywhere, and in the salivary glands is another place. Okay, so general features of salivary gland neoplasms. Most of the tumors are in the parotid, which is good because the parotid is very easy to palpate, very easy to FNA, and really hasn't hurt that much. So all of those things make it nice for us as far as being able to FNA it. Submandibular is about 10 to 20%. However, a bigger piece of that are malignant. So tumors in the submandibular gland is more like, I think in the parotid it's 2/3 are benign and 1/3 are malignant. In the submandibular it's more like 2/3 are malignant, 1/3 are benign. So you'd rather have a tumor in your parotid than your submandibular. Minor salivary glands, fewer tumors, not surprising. Epithelial and mesenchymal tumors occur. 95% of them are epithelial in origin. And the ratio of benign to malignant, again, that's so parotid is higher. I thought of submandibular as more like 2-to-1 reversed, malignant to benign, but I guess I was wrong. But as you can see, as you get more toward the minor salivary glands, it increases, the share of malignant tumors increases, and that's the important thing. So carcinomas generally recur. That's very helpful. If you keep getting these FNAs, and even if they're inadequate, but the tumor keeps coming back or getting bigger, that's a problem. You need to let them know that needs to come out. And recurrences, invasion of the adjacent structures, and often these guys wait to metastasize. Like I was saying, you can go 10, 15 years before you get them met, but they will kill you. And most of the salivary glands neoplasms will present as a palpable mass because they're all pretty much out there in an easy to find place, except for those adenoid cystics in the palate. But the ones in the parotid, the ones in the submandibular are going to be easy to palpate. You can get an FNA of them, and that's helpful. So it's a little early, but we're going to break now since it's getting close to, and then we'll start it back up at around 10 till.